This whole cyberpunk mystery over the last week has really got me thinking about what we're trying to do in this whole crypto space and how shared virtual worlds might fit into that. Guys, we need a Cardano metaverse, a real one. Ready? Let's go. I think it's important to be really clear right now about words and labels. The meaning of words can certainly change over time, and people can stretch the meaning of words for comic and other effect. I do it all the time when I say things like ETH users are enslaved by the tyranny of a blockchain broken by fees. I don't really mean enslaved, tyranny, or broken. Okay, maybe the broken part, but I'm inflating the meaning of those words partially for comic effect and partially to highlight what I think are problems over on that blockchain. This is different than the situation where you're trying to market a product that people are going to give you money for. In that scenario, I think there's a point at which you can stretch the meaning of words and labels too far. It actually misleads people, and you start sort of flirting with the outer fringes of what I would call ethical behavior. Looking at the Google Trend data going all the way back to 2004, you can see that nobody, at least the public, didn't really care about this word metaverse until that big spike over there on the right. That's 2021. What happened in 2021 is that people realized this missing piece of the metaverse puzzle had become a reality. They realized what NFTs were and that NFTs could directly inject assets and assets with real value into a metaverse. Not only that, but these assets could suddenly be persistent. They could live on a blockchain, not just on some server at a video game company, so that if the video game company ever went broke, those assets would go away. And they could be interoperable. If the assets suddenly reside on a blockchain, then they wouldn't be proprietary to one virtual space. You could potentially carry them across any virtual space. Naturally, with this boom in interest, we start seeing crazy things, like the New York Times here writing an article called "Are We in the Metaverse Yet?" This kind of reminded me of that famous Katie Couric clip where she asked, I think it was either a production assistant or a producer behind the camera, what the World Wide Web was, and also what is email. I think we're kind of at that stage with Metaverse. Luckily, whoever authored this article at the New York Times was much more well informed than Katie Couric was back in the day about the internet. And part of the reason for that is that we have gigantic companies like Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg saying things like, we want to get as many people as possible to be able to experience virtual reality and be able to jump into the metaverse and have these social experiences within that. Of course, he's referring to the Facebook project Horizon, which is a nice little product tie-in with their Oculus headsets. I think a lot of people realize that Facebook now controls Oculus, and it kind of adds this product segment to Facebook's online empire, similar to what other companies like Apple have between both hardware and all the stuff they're doing online. Similar to a tech behemoth like Facebook, a lot of crypto projects have already realized that there's some marketing value in tying their brand identity to this notion of a metaverse. But this word metaverse wasn't just the consensus fever dream of a bunch of crypto guys. It didn't materialize out of thin air. It actually came from somewhere. Wikipedia tells us the term was coined in Neil Stephenson's 1992 science fiction novel, Snow Crash. Coincidentally, it looks like Snow Crash is also the book that popularized the term avatar the way we use it today. And it looks like that term was taken from this late 80s game called Habitat for the Commodore 64, which was kind of the very first graphical multi-user virtual world. I wanted to know what Neil Stephenson meant when he invented this term. So I bought this book, Snow Crash, just today, and I just searched for any instance of the word metaverse. It first pops up on page 21. Here, the main character in the book has a business card. On the front of the business card, it says a bunch of stuff that you can read right here about being a freelance hacker and software related intel. On the back of the card, apparently, Neil Stephenson describes this. On the back is gibberish explaining how he may be reached, and it includes a telephone number, universal phone locator code, P.O. box, his address on half a dozen electronic communication nets, and an address in the metaverse. Okay, that doesn't tell us much except that there are locations in the metaverse or addresses. The second, third, and fourth time the author uses the word metaverse are all on page 29. On this page, he seems to say, a narrow beam of any color can be shot out of the innards of the computer up through the fisheye lens. This beam is made to sweep back and forth across the lenses of Hero's goggles in much the same way as the electron beam in a television paints the inner surface of the eponymous tube. The resulting image hangs in place in front of Hero's view of reality. By drawing a slightly different image in front of each eye, the image can be made three-dimensional. By changing the image 72 times a second, it can be made to move. By drawing the moving three-dimensional image at a resolution of 2K pixels on a side, it can be as sharp as the eye can perceive. And then he talks about stereo digital sound, and he says, these are moving 3D pictures. So he's describing VR goggles of some type. He says, Hero is not actually here at all. He's in a computer-generated universe that his computer is drawing onto his goggles and pumping into his earphones. In the lingo, this imaginary place is known as the Metaverse. Hero spends a lot of time in the Metaverse. He says, Hero is approaching the street. It is the Broadway, the Champs-Élysées of the Metaverse. So it's very obvious that when Neil Stephenson, the author of Snow Crash, when he coined this term, he was talking about something the character was experiencing through 3D goggles with sound. It wasn't some kind of fictional LARPing thing that only existed in this character's mind. It was an actual 3D space the character could explore. Like I said at the beginning, the meaning of words and labels can change over time. And let's face it, adding crypto to anything tends to change it, sometimes drastically. But if you just Google the word metaverse, one of the first things that comes up after you get done wading through all the Zuckerberg stuff is the Wikipedia entry for metaverse. It says, the metaverse is a collective virtual shared space created by the convergence of virtually enhanced physical reality and physically persistent virtual space. It is made up of persistent shared 3D virtual spaces linked into a perceived virtual universe. It's pretty obvious to me that this is roughly what the person who invented the term meant, and this is what Wikipedia currently thinks it means. And if we dig a little bit deeper, we have a good summary right here. It says, Stevenson's metaverse appears to its users as an urban environment, a featureless, black, perfectly spherical planet with fictional virtual real estate, and which is available to be bought, and buildings developed thereupon. Users of the metaverse experience it from a first-person perspective. I mean, doesn't that substantially sound like Decentraland? That's Decentraland, right? I think you can say that a metaverse is a 3D virtual space like Decentraland. I think it's okay to say that's a metaverse. You could also say that the metaverse is maybe all of those shared 3D virtual spaces, and maybe it's all of them plus all of the digital assets that exist within those spaces, and by extension, all of the intellectual property that exists within those spaces. I think it's fair. You could have an expansive definition of the metaverse as all of those things, kind of like we refer to the internet, and it's actually a lot of different things. I think those are all fair, but it's going to be extremely enticing for crypto NFT projects, including those in Cardano, to try to link their brand identity to this term metaverse. And I think that's okay if they're saying, hey, we're creating and selling a bunch of assets which could exist in a metaverse. Like if they're saying, hey, we're planning to allow you to use these digital assets in whatever metaverse you want. These would be great to be used in a metaverse, once there's some kind of interoperability with a shared 3D space. I think that's okay to say. They could say these are assets for the metaverse if they're using that expansive definition of the term. But I think there's going to be this huge temptation to imply that digital assets like NFTs, which might only be art pieces, are part of a metaverse when there's no actual metaverse, no actual 3D virtual space that those assets are currently tied to, and no roadmap to tie those assets to any kind of 3D virtual space. So I think if you are in Cardano and you're selling Cardano NFTs and you link the brand identity of those Cardano NFTs to the concept of a metaverse, if you make the would-be purchasers of those assets believe that there's going to be a metaverse for these assets, a shared 3D virtual space for these assets, and you don't actually have any realistic roadmap to build out that shared 3D virtual space, or you don't have some realistic plan to make these assets interoperable with an existing 3D virtual space, I think you're flirting with the fringes of ethical behavior there. And for the record, I don't know any current projects. I have no idea what they're planning on building out, if they're planning to make their assets interoperable with some existing thing that they think fits the definition of metaverse, or if they have a completely different definition of metaverse than the ones that we've discussed here. Having said all that, I think the little cyberpunk mystery in Cardano over the last week or so has made something extremely clear. We need a Cardano metaverse. The ones that exist in Ethereum, Decentraland, Sandbox, I think there's a bunch now. The only one I've used is Decentraland. I think there's a lot of potential there given NFTs. NFTs have pretty much always existed in Decentraland. The lands there have always been NFTs. People have different opinions on the whole virtual real estate thing, but I think there's a lot of value in an actual 3D virtual space. I think a lot of people would agree one of the underpinning fundamentals of crypto is that we were creating a parallel structure. And at first, a lot of the notions centered around a parallel economic structure. It was Bitcoin back in the day. Bitcoin was an alternative to fiat currencies. It was a different structure. And as crypto grew and grew and grew over the last decade, it became apparent that it wasn't just a different way of looking at money. It was a different way at looking at how societies could be structured. Maybe we don't need these old-fashioned corporations. Maybe DAOs can do a lot of the things that corporations can do. Maybe the blockchain is a great way to do certain things in terms of governance. Maybe if people are losing faith in democracy because of questions around voting, maybe the blockchain is a great way to solve those problems. So we have a lot of things besides just money sort of migrating in the direction of crypto and the blockchain space. I think Cardano's project in Ethiopia involving digital identity from the Ministry of Education and storage of educational records, things like that. That's another great example. If even identity is migrating towards crypto, we are creating not just an alternative economic structure, but an alternative societal structure. It's almost like an alternative to normal society, including certain elements of governance of that society. And it wouldn't hurt in Cardano if we had a shared 3D virtual space. We're already building, we're already planting the seeds at least of an alternative society and alternative elements of governance. It wouldn't be bad for us to have a place we can go to that can be the location of that alternative society. I think the easiest way to do that right now would be a metaverse, as is classically described in this book, Snow Crash. And the same way that Wikipedia currently describes it, a shared virtual space. We're already kind of doing this halfway, at least, with text and images in the Cardano subreddit and all the related subreddits, and with Cardano Twitter. We're all sort of interacting with each other as a loosely knit society. It's just that we're only doing it via text and images so far. I think it's time for us to take that next step and create an actual 3D virtual world that can iterate over the years, get better and better and better. I mean, I think that's probably where a lot of our work life is going anyways. I mean, does anybody think that Zoom calls in 10 years aren't going to be more immersive than they are today? I mean, as graphics get better and better, we might be able to have 3D shared spaces that are almost photorealistic. And if we can build the very fundamental beginning version of that right now in Cardano, one where we can actually use our Cardano digital assets like NFTs, I think that's the first step. I think we should go there now. I mean, imagine if we have this Cardano metaverse, this shared 3D virtual space. It's a whole world, but maybe there's like a main street and you can walk down that main street and there's like a Cardano attorney and a Cardano accountant, and there's like a Mongolian embassy and a Georgian embassy and an Ethiopian embassy. And if you want to learn Mongolian, you could walk into the Mongolian embassy and they've got a special room where you walk in there and there's a native speaker of Mongolian who will sit and teach you Mongolian because they want to spread the language and culture of their nation. Just like they could have a Mongolian economic attache, so that if you want to do some kind of Cardano based business in Mongolia, you would just go talk to that economic attache and start making some connections. Just like you could walk into the Cardano attorney's little building, and they could advise you on legal issues, or the accountant or whatever. This could be the location of this parallel Cardano society that's kind of organically already building itself. It might as well have a place where it can live in 3D. But most importantly, I think we should be clear when people are trying to sell you things in Cardano. They need to be clear about whether that's where they're headed, or they're just selling you Cardano digital assets that could one day be incorporated into Cardano virtual worlds like that. Talk to you tomorrow.